Imagine for a moment that the men sworn to protect the most powerful leader on earth suddenly realized they were the only ones close enough to kill him. The ancient Roman poet Juvenal once asked a question that has echoed through the halls of power for thousands of years. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who will guard the guards themselves? When we think of the Roman Empire, we picture glorious legions expanding the borders and absolute emperors ruling as living gods from the Palatine Hill. But the true power in Rome didn't always sit on the throne. Often, the true power stood right behind it. They were the Praetorian Guard. Created to be the ultimate shield of the emperor, they evolved into one of the most entrenched, dangerous political forces in the ancient world. They didn't rule the empire directly, but for centuries, they acted as heavily armed kingmakers within the capital. They assassinated emperors who threatened their privileges, crowned those who agreed to their financial terms, and in their darkest, most corrupt hour, they literally put the Roman Empire up for auction, selling the throne of the world to the highest bidder. This is the story of how an elite unit of bodyguards managed to hold the greatest political institution on earth hostage, and how their corruption became a devastating catalyst for Rome's internal decay. To truly understand how this institutional hijacking happened, we must look at the brilliant architect who created them, Caesar Augustus. Augustus was a political genius of the highest order. After decades of bloody civil war, he knew that the people of Rome deeply hated the concept of kings. So, he played a masterful psychological game. He maintained the theatrical illusion of the old republic. He kept the Senate, the consuls, and the elections running. He presented himself not as a monarch, but simply as the princeps, the first citizen. But behind this polite illusion of democracy, Augustus knew he needed an iron fist. He needed to ensure that no ambitious general or angry senator could ever threaten his life. By ancient Roman tradition, the Pomerium, the sacred boundary of the city of Rome, was a demilitarized zone. No armed legion was allowed to cross it. But Augustus established a specialized protection force, the Praetorian Guard. Initially, this force consisted of roughly 4,500 hand-picked soldiers. To avoid looking like a tyrant, Augustus was incredibly careful. He didn't station all of them inside Rome. He scattered them in surrounding towns, keeping only a fraction of them close to his palace. Officially, they were just his personal bodyguard. Unofficially, they were a highly paid standing force, securing his authority. For the first few decades of the empire, the system worked. The guard kept the peace, intimidated political rivals, and protected the emperor. But power has a natural, inevitable tendency to consolidate. The critical, disastrous shift in the geopolitical balance of Rome happened under the reign of the second emperor, Tiberius. Tiberius was a gloomy, paranoid, and reclusive ruler. As he grew older, he retreated to the isolated island of Capri, leaving much of the administration of the Roman Empire to the ambitious commander of his guard, a man named Aelius Sejanus. Sejanus was calculating and ruthless. Around the year 23 AD, he convinced the absent emperor that the Praetorian Guards shouldn't be scattered across Italy. To respond quickly to any uprisings, he argued, they needed to be centralized. Tiberius agreed. Sejanus built the Castra Praetoria, a massive, heavily fortified military fortress situated just outside the city. This was a profound turning point. By putting all the Praetorians into one massive fortress, Sejanus transformed them from a dispersed protection detail into a highly organized military junta. They realized that in a capital city, their concentrated force gave them immense leverage over the political arena. The shield, designed to protect the emperor, had sharpened itself into a sword. the Praetorians truly unleashed this terrifying political power in the year 41 AD, during the reign of Caligula. Caligula's reign was a nightmare of cruelty, erratic behavior, and absolute humiliation for the Roman elite. Crucially, he made the fatal mistake of constantly mocking the veteran officers of his own guard. Ancient sources suggest he would give them insulting passwords for the night watch, deliberately degrading their honor. Those hardened officers decided the emperor had to be removed. But this wasn't a random mutiny. It was a highly organized, calculated political assassination, orchestrated by the highest levels of the imperial security apparatus. On the final day of the Palatine Games, Caligula left the theatre early. He walked down a dark, narrow, subterranean gallery beneath the imperial palace, a tunnel known as the Cryptoporticus. The trap was sprung. Led by Praetorian tribunes Cassius Chaerea and Cornelius Sabinus, the guards surrounded the emperor. As Caligula spoke, Chaerea struck a heavy blow, and Sabinus immediately thrust his sword into Caligula's chest. The rest of the conspirators closed in, stabbing the emperor repeatedly. The most powerful man on earth was butchered in the shadows by the very men paid heavily to protect him. The assassination of Caligula shattered the illusion of imperial divinity. It proved that a Roman emperor bled just like any other man. But what happened in the immediate aftermath changed the course of human history. With the emperor dead, the Roman Senate rushed to the Capitol. They cheered the death of the tyrant and spent the night debating the restoration of the old Roman Republic. They believed they were finally back in charge. But the politicians had forgotten the golden rule of statecraft. Political power does not grow from speeches in the Senate. It grows from the edge of a sword. While the senators talked, Praetorian guards were sweeping through the imperial palace. Behind a curtain, shaking in absolute terror, they found Caligula's uncle. His name was Claudius. For his entire life, the Roman elite had dismissed Claudius due to a severe stutter and a noticeable limp. They thought he was a passive fool. But Claudius was a brilliant survivor who understood exactly how dangerous the Praetorians were. The Praetorians realized a profound, cynical truth. If the Senate successfully restored the Republic, there would be no need for an emperor. And without an emperor, their elite status and massive salaries would vanish. They needed a monarch to justify their own existence. They didn't execute the terrified scholar. Instead, they carried Claudius to their heavily fortified camp, the Castra Praetoria, and unilaterally declared him the new emperor of Rome. To secure his throne and calm the armed men surrounding him, Claudius did something that would permanently alter the politics of the Roman Empire. He promised the Praetorians a massive cash bonus, known as the donativum, in exchange for their loyalty. The exact amount is debated by historians, but it was a staggering sum, equivalent to thousands of sesterces per man. He had officially institutionalized the transaction of power. From that moment on, an unwritten rule governed Rome. An emperor's survival often depended on keeping the Praetorian Guard wealthy and satisfied. Over the next century and a half, the Praetorians acted as terrifying kingmakers. They grew incredibly wealthy, deeply entrenched in Roman politics, and dangerously privileged. While the actual Roman legions fought and bled in the freezing mud of Britannia or the scorching deserts of Parthia, the Praetorians enjoyed the luxurious baths, theatres, and comforts of the capital. But their absolute arrogance and detachment from reality reached its horrifying climax in the year 193 AD. A year that would expose the total moral bankruptcy of the system. Following the assassination of the megalomaniac Emperor Commodus, a man whose chaotic reign had severely drained the Roman treasury, a disciplined military veteran named Pertinax took the throne. Pertinax looked at the Praetorian Guard and saw exactly what they had become, a bloated syndicate that was holding the state hostage. To satisfy their immediate demands, Pertinax actually sold off Commodus's luxury assets to raise funds, promising the guards a donativum of several thousand sesterces per man. But Pertinax made a fatal error. He thought he could buy their loyalty and then force them back into strict military discipline. For the Praetorians, discipline was an unforgivable insult. The gold they received wasn't enough if it came with rules they despised. A mob of roughly 300 Praetorian guards marched out of their camp and straight into the imperial palace. They murdered Pertinax, cut off his head, mounted it on a spear, and paraded it through the streets of Rome like a gruesome trophy. The citizens of Rome were horrified. The Senate was paralyzed with fear, but the Praetorians had lost their minds entirely. Returning to their fortress and standing on the high walls of the Castra Praetoria, they did the unthinkable. They announced to the city of Rome that the empire was officially for sale. They were holding an open auction for the throne of the world. According to historical accounts, two incredibly wealthy politicians arrived at the gates of the military camp to place their bids. On one side was Sulpicianus, the father-in-law of the murdered Emperor Pertinax. On the other was a vastly wealthy, fiercely ambitious senator named Didius Julianus. The negotiation that followed was a masterclass in geopolitical decay. The Praetorian officers stood on the walls, looking down at the two aristocrats, relaying bids back and forth. Sulpicianus offered 20,000 sesterces to every soldier. The guards were thrilled. But Didius Julianus, desperate for absolute power, raised his hand and shattered the Roman economy. He offered 25,000 sesterces to every single man in the guard. It was an astronomical sum of money. The guards immediately accepted. They opened the gates, brought Didius Julianus inside, and declared him the emperor of the Roman Empire. Julianus had bought the world, but he quickly learned a brutal, inescapable lesson in statecraft. You can buy a throne with gold, but you can only keep it with iron. When the news of this disgusting auction reached the frontier borders, the real Roman army was absolutely enraged. The hardened, battle-tested legions fighting in the freezing forests of the Danube and the harsh frontiers of the east looked at the Praetorians with absolute disgust. They saw a privileged syndicate of overpaid guards who had just disgraced the honor of Rome. The governor of Pannonia Superior, a ruthless, pragmatic and brilliant general named Septimius Severus, saw his opportunity. His loyal legions declared him emperor. With the unquestionable political legitimacy of a massive veteran army behind him, Severus marched directly toward Rome. Didius Julianus, the man who had bought the empire, panicked. He desperately ordered the Praetorian Guard to fortify the city and prepare for war. But the Praetorians were terrified. They knew how to assassinate unarmed politicians in dark palace corridors, and they knew how to extort gold from the Senate. But they had absolutely no chance against hardened combat veterans who had spent their lives fighting real wars. As Severus approached the city, the Praetorians realized they were doomed. To save their own lives, they abandoned Julianus. The emperor who bought the world was executed in his palace after a pathetic reign of just 66 days. Severus entered Rome without shedding a single drop of blood, but he had a score to settle with the Praetorian Guard. He knew he couldn't rule an empire with treacherous, highly paid kingmakers standing behind his throne. He had to neutralize them completely. Severus played a brilliant tactical trick. He sent a message to the Praetorians, offering them peace and a new oath of loyalty. He ordered them to leave their weapons in their armory and to march out of the city dressed in their finest ceremonial armor for a grand military parade. The arrogant guards, perhaps believing they were about to receive another massive bribe from the new emperor, marched out into the open field unarmed. The moment they were in the open, Severus's veteran legions closed in. The Praetorians were completely surrounded by a wall of drawn swords and leveled spears. The trap was perfectly executed. Severus rode to the front and looked down at the men who had auctioned off Rome. He didn't order a massacre. He did something much worse for the psychology of an elite Roman soldier. He humiliated them. He ordered his veteran legionaries to strip the Praetorians of their ceremonial armor, their gold belts, their cloaks, and their military insignia. Disarmed, disgraced, and terrified, the Praetorians were formally banished. Severus ordered them to run, threatening instant death to any man who ever came within 100 miles of Rome again. He completely dissolved the corrupt Italian Guard and replaced them with his own loyal, battle-hardened legionaries from the frontiers. The original Praetorian Guard was dead. The institution would survive in various, heavily altered forms for another century. But its ultimate end came at the hands of Emperor Constantine the Great. In the year 312 AD, after defeating a rival army at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine looked at the Praetorian camp, the fortress that Sejanus had built 3 centuries earlier, and ordered it to be dismantled, stone by stone. He disbanded the Guard permanently, erasing their military presence from the city of Rome forever. The story of the Praetorian Guard is one of the most vital warnings in human history. They were created to be the ultimate solution to political instability, a shield to protect the state from chaos. But they ultimately proved the oldest, most terrifying rule of geopolitics. An institution given immense armed power will eventually realize that it answers to no one. They proved that absolute power doesn't reside in senates, in crowns, or in laws written on parchment. It resides with the men holding the swords. The Praetorian Guard did not cause the fall of the Roman Empire alone. Rome faced massive economic crises, endless civil wars, and overextended borders. But the corruption and betrayal of the guards poured gasoline on the fire, contributing to the severe political instability that slowly poisoned the empire from the inside out. To see exactly how this kind of institutional decay and military instability eventually led to the total collapse of the Roman Empire, click the video on your screen right now to watch our full documentary on the fall of Rome. History is written by the survivors. Stay epic and stay curious.